The soft clink of crystal against marble echoed through La Perla's grand dining room, a sound so sharp, so final, it seemed to slice through the hush of privilege and power like a warning shot before a reckoning. In that frozen moment, all eyes swept toward the trembling waitress, Sophia Morales, who crouched wordlessly, gathering scarlet-stained shards beneath a table of men who laughed, joked, and, with a handful of careless words, branded her invisible. But Sophia had a secret. She understood every twist of their foreign tongues, every harmless joke, every scheme masked behind multi-million-dollar deals. She'd spent a lifetime learning how to listen, silent, clever, unseen. Tonight, however, the humiliation burned deeper than usual. And as the mocking voice of Mr. Ramirez, the company's revered legal titan, reverberated in 3 languages, something inside her finally snapped. They say the waitresses here come cheap. We're better off letting them pour wine than weigh in on a man's business. A simple sentence, brazen and casual, delivered in English, then French, then Italian. But Sophia repeated it silently, noting the way power is wielded so thoughtlessly by those who have always possessed it. Her cheeks flushed, but it was not shame she felt, it was the beginning of rage. That's when she met his eyes. Alejandro Mendoza, young, rich, magnetic, and, to all the world, untouchable. His gaze was a storm and a question, as if he saw through every mask she wore. He knelt beside her, expensive suit be damned, and in a voice both gentle and dangerous asked, "Are you really invisible? Or just hiding?" Tonight, with the clatter of glass, Sophia crossed an irretrievable line. Behind her, family secrets slept in dust-covered boxes. Before her, the man whose empire was built on their bones. And woven between them, stolen inventions, heartbreak buried beneath corporate grandeur, and a dangerous, growing attraction that neither could ignore. As thunder rolled beyond the rain-speckled windows, destiny gave Sophia a stage she never sought. To claim the justice her grandmother was denied, she would have to risk everything, her job, her future, even her heart, against a legacy that would do anything to silence her. Have you ever been told to sit quiet, to stay small, only to realize the moment to rise has finally come? What would you do, standing on the edge between truth and survival? Share in the comments, when did you know it was time to stand up for what mattered, no matter the cost? And don't forget to like this story. Sophia's battle is just beginning, and your voice might be the spark that tips the scale. The crystalline echo of shattered glass tore through the luxury of La Perla's dining hall, a sound as raw as the pain it signaled. In that jarring instant, all the polished surfaces, gilded forks, and crystal chandeliers seemed to cast a spotlight on Sophia Morales, age 25, kneeling to gather wine-splashed fragments that stained the marble floor like droplets of blood. Sophia's hands trembled, not from the accident, but from the sting of words still vibrating in her ears, words never meant for someone like her to understand, cruel jokes and dismissals volleyed in English, French, and Italian at the center table. These barrio waitresses have no education. They can't possibly understand international business, can they? Mr. Ramirez's laughter, a partner at the wealthiest firm in Jalisco, was like a dagger in the hush. Let them pour the wine, not join in men's conversations. The old cruelty masked itself in languages meant to shut her out, never knowing how easily she could listen in. For Sophia, it wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel invisible or small, but tonight felt different. Tonight, humiliation was sharpened by knowledge, a new, chilling awareness of what really lay beneath those million-dollar negotiations. Fury wrestled with despair in her aching chest. She squeezed her fists, remembering Elena, her grandmother, "Never let those who dismiss you write your story." Still on the ground, she glimpsed herself in the mirrored wall, a young woman in a threadbare uniform, delicate and ordinary at first glance, but with green eyes now blazing at injustice. The fire lit in her by every unfairness since childhood, every loss and sacrifice that left her working tables instead of finishing her university degree, burst into life. She would not look down. A shadow fell across the shards. "Let me help," came a low, calmly urgent male voice. Sophia's heart thudded as she looked up into the intense blue eyes of a man she recognized at once. It was Alejandro Mendoza, his handsomely measured face seen on the gold plaques and magazine covers, legend and empire incarnate. She flinched, wary, but he knelt anyway, expensive suit dusted in wine, speaking not like a boss or conqueror, but as an equal. "Blame the one who made you tremble, not yourself." Their hands almost touched over a sliver of glass. Energy sparked, dangerous, electric, confusing. "Who are you?" she whispered, refusing to show fear. "Alejandro Mendoza," he answered, and in that name, her world shifted, the man whose family's power had shaped her city, and perhaps ruined her own. His sudden, sympathetic gaze was not at all what she'd prepared for in her private scripts of revenge. But he was trouble. She could not allow herself to trust him, not yet. Alejandro didn't hide his fascination. "You were translating everything at the business table. Your French and Italian are flawless." He described her subtle nods, her barely hidden reactions, the marks of a mind alert behind a servant's uniform. He saw her not as just a waitress, but as the person she truly was, fractured between dreams and obligations, intellect and survival. When she finally admitted her unfinished studies, her grandmother's illness, the way life had forced her into shrinking herself, Alejandro listened without condescension. For Sophia, it was both a solace and a threat, a wound and a dare. But there was more. "What exactly did you hear?" he asked, and Sophia, bravely, detailed what she'd learned, the company's expansion plans, the patents purchased long ago, the offhand cruelty as her grandmother was dismissed as a crazy old woman with nothing of value. The room seemed to shrink. Generations of pain, Elena's legacy, erased and stolen, pressed down. Their exchange was an explosive collision, his shame and dawning empathy, her defiance and heartache. Beneath the pulse of mutual distrust, something unfamiliar flickered, complicated respect, and in the depths of both their eyes, the gravity of everything at stake. Sophia realized she was standing at the threshold, not just of a confrontation, but of her own transformation. The little girl who bowed her head now stood, chin high, staring down the man whose entire future, and possibly his conscience, hung on whether he would choose truth or continue old betrayals. As the shift manager's barked orders broke the moment, Sophia retreated with the glass, only to find Alejandro's card left discreetly behind, a white beacon among the red stains and shadows. Later, in the sanctuary of her grandmother's study, Sophia leafed through Elena's old documents, every faded signature and lost patent a reminder of both the shame and the strength she carried. Tears of pain and joy warred on her cheeks. Tonight, for the first time, she allowed herself to hope. The battle was finally hers to fight. The lines between victim and hero, oppressor and ally, began to blur. Sophia Morales, the invisible granddaughter, the underestimated protégé, had become the voice of the future. Alejandro Mendoza, the powerful heir, had met his match. The broken glass marked not an ending, but the beginning of a reckoning. Have you ever been forced to choose between staying quiet and risking it all for justice? When in your life did you realize silence was no longer an option? Tell us in the comments, because Sophia's story is only just beginning. The rain drummed softly against the windowpanes as Sunday afternoon cloaked Sophia's childhood home in a hush of old secrets. Alejandro stood at the threshold, uncertain, clutching the chill of uncertainty while Sophia's eyes beckoned him through the narrow corridor lined with echoes of a life lived in the margins of genius and heartbreak. Inside Elena's study, time seemed suspended. Awards and dog-eared notebooks covered every surface, signs of brilliance left to gather dust because a woman's name was so easy to erase. Sophia's fingers gently brushed a photograph of her grandmother, her voice a tremulous whisper. She trusted the wrong people. She believed recognition would come if she only worked hard enough and played by the rules. But she underestimated how hungry the world is for easy power, and how little room it makes for women like her, and for girls like me. A silent tension coiled between them. Alejandro's shoulders tightened as he took in the faded diplomas and hand-drawn blueprints. Sitting at Elena's worn desk, Sophia began sifting through sealed envelopes and old tapes. Her hands shook as she unearthed the contracts, official stamps, legal jargon, and, in bold black ink, the unyielding signature he knew too well, Ricardo Mendoza, his own father. A wave of disbelief crashed over Alejandro. Each document, each dated deposit, fingered his family's fortune as the spoils of a legacy built on another's dreams. The betrayal was not just corporate, it was intimate, familial, poisonous. "My father always told me he built everything with his own hands," Alejandro muttered, thumb tracing the edge of a schematics page. His eyes clouded, not with denial, but shame. He left out whose hands he cut in the process. Sophia turned, her pain flaring with every revelation. "Your father called my grandmother unstable. He said she was a relic from another era." Her voice trembled as bitterness and grief found release. She was a visionary. But she was a woman. And in the 90s, that made her disposable to powerful men. The room felt smaller as truth bloomed between them, painful and raw. Alejandro listened to a recording, Elena's voice, fierce yet brittle, explaining her invention's promise and her disappointment. His composure fractured. Her words, made real, became a wound he could not turn from. "Why did you show this to me?" he asked, voice rough with regret and a spark of hope, a wish to undo at least one cycle of injustice. "Because you needed to know what you inherited," Sophia replied, steadying herself, her resolve as palpable as her pain. "Not the company. The silence. The guilt. The chance to do better." Alejandro faced her, a storm churning in his conscience. "If it's all true, if my father did this." The words faltered, but a razor-edged clarity cut through his denial. "If his empire is built on her ashes, I don't want any part of it." Sophia's expression softened, wounded but resolute. "It isn't about what you want, Alejandro, it's about what you choose to do now." A new understanding flickered in Alejandro's eyes, and for the first time, the barrier between them showed a crack, not one born of desire, but of shared purpose and pain. Their stories, separate yet entwined, demanded not revenge, but courage and truth. "Tell me," Sophia said, "do you believe a family can heal from this? Can something broken become a source of light?" Alejandro's answer was a whisper, "I don't know. But I want to try." Beyond the window, the rain's rhythm seemed to quicken, and with heavy hearts, they assembled the evidence. Not just against the past, but for the justice that was still possible. As dusk draped the city, a fragile alliance began to form, one with the power to confront history, and maybe, to write a new ending. A pale dawn filtered through the towering glass facade of Mendoza Enterprises as Sophia stepped into her new role, a consultant, but also a potential saboteur, a truth seeker, and, despite herself, an unwilling conspirator to her own emotional confusion. She moved through sterile, echoing hallways with a cautious purpose, her badge flashing a name beneath the corporate logo she'd once regarded only with bitterness. Now, every door she pressed her card to creaked open to file cabinets of secrets, invitations to betrayal, and ambiguous hope. Alejandro greeted her with a half-smile in the boardroom. Bulls and bears danced on a muted stock ticker, oblivious to the storm gathering behind closed doors. "Ready for your first deep dive?" he asked, pushing across a pile of confidential files. His voice was light, but his eyes were rimmed with fatigue, shadowed by trust issues inherited like the rest of his empire. Sophia nodded, her heart hammering beneath a new blouse she hoped was professional enough. "As ready as I'll ever be." She forced herself to ignore the faint tremor in her hand as she leafed through contracts signed decades before she was born, documents thick with injustice, and now fingerprints of her own resolve. Between them, an unspoken question simmered: how much of herself must she compromise to correct a world that never played fair? Their partnership was forged in necessity, but trust was another matter. Over spreadsheets and endless cups of coffee in windowless offices, tension coiled tight. Alejandro offered access, kept promises. Yet every gesture, every word, had the clumsy weight of two people trying to be allies, even as old wounds kept them braced for betrayal. Sometimes, late at night, they bickered over strategies, Sofia with sharp, impassioned logic, Alejandro, torn between corporate pragmatism and a longing to do better. Each disagreement was a spark, kindling both admiration and suspicion. Despite this, something shifted. Their shared mission, cataloging all inventors whose dreams had been devoured by the company, gave them moments of disarming intimacy. A late dinner in a deserted cafeteria, laughter over a mistranslated contract. Glances held too long. Trust, they discovered, is not a clean leap, but a hesitant, mutual reaching, across trauma, across history. Still, Sofia could not silence her doubts. Was she a pawn, pulled into a family's internal war? Or was she, finally, the hand rewriting her grandmother's end? Alejandro, for his part, faced nightly reckonings in the privacy of his spacious office, remembering how his father had spoken of loyalty while quietly accumulating broken people beneath the foundation of every success. Was he, too, destined to become that man, charming, ruthless, alone? The pressure mounted when Alejandro made good on his promise. Sofia was given full access to internal records, but soon after, whispers rippled through the building. Long-time employees eyed her warily. Sofia felt every gaze, every silence, the threat that one misstep would make her a scapegoat, or worse, reveal just how deep her alliance with Alejandro ran. The boundaries between them grew fragile, professional in daylight, frayed by stolen moments and the near confession that sometimes threaded through their conversations. One evening, finding themselves alone after everyone else left, Sofia let her mask slip. "You know, I haven't decided if I can actually trust you," she admitted. Alejandro met her gaze, vulnerable for once. "I'm not sure I've earned it. But I'd rather fail trying to be better than succeed repeating my father's mistakes." Their hands brushed, first by accident, then not. The moment crackled. Every scar, every hope, every fear illuminated. This alliance, they realized, was no longer about survival. It had become about transformation, of a corrupt legacy, of themselves, and, just maybe, of each other. But as they started to glimpse the scale of Mendoza Enterprises' past crimes, a cold truth surfaced: powerful enemies were watching, and a movement was taking shape in the shadows, one hungry to silence them, no matter the cost. Night unfurled over the glass towers of Mendoza Enterprises, its lights a brittle armor warding off the darkness gathering within. In a small, makeshift office, Sofia sat hunched over a flood of confidential documents. Her jaw set, green eyes haunted but unyielding, she catalogued not one but a dozen inventors, dreamers whose lives had been quietly devoured by the company's hunger for power. Alejandro stood by the window, shoulders taut, wrestling with the weight of family, guilt, and the daunting clarity of what needed to be done. Every creased page was a wound. Here, a GPS pioneer who died impoverished; there, a woman's touchscreen design, now ubiquitous, once dismissed as naive. The evidence was undeniable: a decades-long, systemic theft. Sofia's pain curdled into righteous fury. "It wasn't just my grandmother," she whispered. "They destroyed hope, generation after generation." She felt the fatigue of grief, the betrayal gnawing at her, but beneath it pulsed a new strength. Alejandro's conscience fractured anew as he read emails, his father's orders, the signatures of accomplices like Ramirez woven through every deal. "How do I reclaim a legacy built on theft?" he muttered, voice ragged. "How do I face the workers, the public, myself?" Their alliance, born of necessity, was now forged in something deeper: shared outrage and the dawning courage to fight back. But as they delved further, danger pressed in. Whispers started in the corridors, mysterious phone calls, veiled threats from Ramirez, legal memos meant to intimidate. Employees turned cold, old allies muttered about corporate witch hunts, and one night, Sophia found her home's mailbox slashed open, a sly warning to back off. Doubt gnawed at them. Was Alejandro sacrificing his company for a pain that wasn't truly his? Was Sophia risking everything for a justice she might never see? But doubt evolved into resolve. Your father stole from visionaries, Sophia told him, but you get to choose what kind of Mendoza you'll be. The word struck him like a blessing and a curse. Summoning allies, they began to interview the living victims. Old men and women, faded by time yet burning with raw hurt, came forward with stories and evidence. Each testimony was a blow to Mendoza's crumbling edifice of respectability, and to Alejandro's heart, bearing the full scope of his family's betrayal. But as their movement grew, gathering momentum among employees, media, and would-be whistleblowers, so did resistance. Ramirez, master of backroom deals, used fear and misinformation. He orchestrated a campaign, veiled blackmail, private investigators shadowing Sophia, and a whisper network painting her as unstable, her quest a vendetta rather than a search for truth. Inside Alejandro, a war raged. Could he bring down a corrupt regime and lose everything, fortune, reputation, even his mother's support, for the sake of strangers? Sophia watched his nightly torment, her admiration and longing deepening, but so did her impatience. "This is bigger than you or me," she said one stormy evening, eyes flashing. "We have to stand for everyone who was silenced." Her conviction cut through his doubts, because she was willing to lose everything for the truth, so must he. Together, trembling but defiant, they made a plan: public exposure. A press conference. Legal filings. Calling witnesses. The company walls seemed to close in, but at last, on the eve before their reckoning, Alejandro looked at Sophia and finally understood: legacy was not what you inherited, but what you dared to transform. "Tomorrow," he told her softly, voice thick with both terror and hope, "we stop hiding. No more secrets. We fight, no matter the cost." The hotel conference room thrummed with the nervous energy of a breaking storm, reporters whispering, cameras poised, the air electric with expectation and risk. Sophia stood behind the curtain, hands icy despite the feverish pulse in her throat, Alejandro steady at her side. In 3 days, their private crusade had become a swelling movement, desperate midnight calls from inventors, journalists piecing together decades of theft, and supporters rallying in the streets for justice. But tonight, it all came down to this moment. Alejandro squeezed Sophia's hand, his own mask of composure a shield against the dread gnawing at his resolve. He would soon lay bare his father's crimes to the world, risking ruin for the hope of redemption. As they took the stage, Sophia's mind spun with memories, her grandmother's voice, trembling on old recordings, the riot of fear and pride in facing down Ramirez, the fragile, growing love forged in the fires of opposition. "We're not just here for ourselves," she whispered to Alejandro. "We're here for everybody the world tried to silence." He nodded, voice husky, "Let them hear the truth. From you first." Beneath the searing lights, Sophia spoke for the first time not as a victim, but as a force. She named Elena Morales, told of hope destroyed and ideas stolen, of dignity traded for profit. As her story rippled outwards, others joined her, Carlos describing the years lost to despair, Maria confessing sleepless decades spent watching her invention fuel others' fortunes. Each word struck a nerve, every detail electrified a watching nation. Yet in the crowd, Ramirez remained cold, his gaze promising retribution. The tension was bone-deep, victims risking all for truth, corporate powers arrayed for a final counterstrike. Alejandro's turn came. He admitted his family's sins in full, voice raw with pain and resolve. "My father built an empire on genius that was never his. The Mendoza name will no longer hide what it destroyed. I am ready to lose everything, so we can, at last, do right by those who created the future." A hush swept the room. When questions came, hard, relentless, sometimes cruel, Sophia answered with clarity forged from heartbreak. She demanded not only compensation, but recognition, not only justice for Elena, but for every unseen voice. The movement could not be contained. Online, stories multiplied. Protests began outside Mendoza's gates. An army was rising. One built not from vengeance, but from solidarity and hope that the world might, finally, belong to those whose dreams and labor made it possible. As Sophia looked to Alejandro, she saw exhaustion and love, despair and steel. The fight was far from over. Ramirez would strike back, and the courts would be merciless. But as the applause thundered through the hall, Sophia understood the war had changed. They were not alone. The truth had been set free, and it would not go quietly back into the dark. Sunlight poured through the windows of Elena's old study, now transformed into the vibrant heart of the Elena Morales Foundation. Boxes of documents, once proof of theft and pain, became the Foundation's first archive, open to inventors seeking justice, guidance, and hope. For Sophia, placing each file on the shelf was both a liberation and a benediction. The weight that had bent her family for decades was finally shared with the world, reframed as a victory rather than a wound. Alejandro stood beside her, sleeves rolled, hands careful, a different man than the polished executive who'd once measured his worth in market shares. There were scars around his eyes now, loss, shame, the cost of choosing truth over legacy, but in their depths was also something new, peace, the hard-won kind that only comes after standing naked before your own history and surviving its judgment. Outside, Mendoza Enterprises hummed with the sounds of reinvention. The company had shed its old skin. Shrunk by lawsuits, battered in public, but reborn under fierce new ethics and a board determined to protect innovation rather than prey on it. Those who'd clung to the past, like Ramirez, had faded or fallen. A new generation, inspired by Sophia's courage, was determined never to betray brilliance again. Yet for Sophia, the real reward came not in victories tallied or headlines written, but in a quiet Sunday wedding beneath the garden arch grown from her grandmother's herbs. Alejandro pledged his heart with tears in his eyes and trembling hands, not out of guilt, but out of gratitude. I promise to choose truth, to build a future with you where no dream is ever stolen again. For Sophia, it was a vow she had carried her whole life, the promise that love and justice, difficult as they were, could still occupy the same home. Together, they built the Foundation's first scholarship, naming it for Elena and every forgotten inventor whose dreams had almost vanished in the dark. Closure was not the end, but a doorway. As dusk fell, Sophia traced her grandmother's name on the Foundation plaque, feeling her presence in the garden's wind, in Alejandro's embrace, and in her own unbreakable voice. And as the city beyond their window pulsed with life, Sophia asked the question now passed on to everyone who finds themselves at the edge: when you finally reclaim your truth, what legacy will you choose to build? Tell us in the comments who you fight for, so that together, stories like Sophia's will never disappear again.